have a lot of thank yous for being brought in to speak to you guys tonight. First of all, I'd like to thank Anthony Antonello and Joe Armstrong for live streaming this event. Anthony has been an awesome friend of mine. He's a great mover and shaker in the alternative media movement, and just a great guy to have around, and Joe Armstrong has been his right-hand man doing a lot of these things. The Honorable Constable Ed Lee is here, one of my chapter heads out of Sunbury, Pennsylvania. He has already signed a resolution against the National Defense Authorization Act. We're very glad to have him in the audience. Nick DeFonte is out hiding. There he is. And he is my state coordinator for Pennsylvania, so he has been doing a great job in contacting state legislators and trying to get movement against the National Defense Authorization Act here. I'd like to thank also the Williamsport Tea Party for having me come down and speak to you guys, and then finally the TSA for giving me stories to tell on the way home. All right, so this is the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012. I am Dan Johnson of PANDA, and let's begin. Other button. Okay, so we're going to go through a few things on the National Defense Authorization Act here. Number one, what is it? Number two, how is it bad? Number three, does it apply to American citizens? And number four, does the NDAA undermine your constitutional rights? And then, what can and should you do about it? So, the NDAA, first of all, is good. It is the National Defense Authorization Act, and it authorizes funding for our defense. So our military gets their funding, our military gets their pay from this appropriations bill, etc., and has been passed for over 48 years by Congress. It actually was passed for the 49th time just recently in a vote of 98-0 in the Senate. And they're going to be looking to pass a conference report here shortly. And that's great. However, since this bill passes so often, it has, since 9/11, become that proverbial haystack that you can throw a needle into. Nobody will notice because the bill always passes. So the needles that were thrown in 2007, the John Warner National Defense Authorization Act, authorized a military unit to operate on U.S. soil, only on U.S. soil, and for specific purposes of civil disobedience and crowd control. And this was later repealed in 2009, coincidentally after the election, but it set the stage for the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. And sections 1021 and 1022 authorize the detention without charge or trial of, in a nutshell, anyone in the United States, in the world, whether an American citizen or not. And it was passed 283 to 136 in the House and 93-7 in the Senate. So the NDAA takes its authority from the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force. Passed in response to 9/11, that's what led us into Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. And the AUMF was developed as a good thing. But it has since been abused. But it was developed as, okay, we're going to get these terrorists back for their crimes that they perpetrated on U.S. soil. Well, here's the language from the AUMF. In general, that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons that he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons, in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Now, this policy set up a retribution against those who perpetrated 9/11. It was specifically tied to the terrorist attacks of 9/11-2001. It is retroactive, like our justice system should be. If I call you a murderer and you haven't committed a crime, and then I lock you up and you have no chance to defend yourself and say, I am not a murderer, I am not a criminal, just by my accusation, then that is a proactive justice system. The AUMF is retroactive like our justice system should be, but as we'll see in the future, in the next slides of this presentation, the NDAA is a proactive, also known as pre-crime justice system. So the AUMF had a specific targeting profile of which people could be detained under the authorization for use of military force. People who planned, authorized, committed, aided, or harbored the terrorists that perpetrated 9/11. It's very specific. It is tied to the 9/11 attacks, and you had to be directly involved in the 9/11 attacks to be persecuted or prosecuted under the AUMF. The NDAA expands that authority. So Section 1021b2, a person who is a part of or substantially supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners, including any person who has committed a belligerent act or directly supported such hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. Now this is interesting because it expands the authority, and here's a side-by-side look at the AUMF and NDAA Section 1021b1 and NDAA 1021b2. Now, because a lot of people don't usually actually read legislation, they look at either what the news says on it, or they look at what certain authority figures they like say about this legislation. They don't really look into when someone who voted for the NDAA in 2012 says, you know, it's just the AUMF. It's the AUMF all over again. We're putting it right back into law. Technically, they're right. 1021b1 is the AUMF. It's copied and pasted from the bill. However, 1021b2 adds a new bunch of new targets. So any person who is a part of or supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces. Judge Katherine Forrest in Hedges v. Obama. This was a case that was brought to the 4th District Court of New York by a bunch of activists in late January against the National Defense Authorization Act. She asked the government, specifically, if someone wrote a book that said nothing about Al-Qaeda and the Taliban throughout it, but in the front page of the book says, I support the political goals of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, could that person be detained? The government says, we don't know. Well, if they don't know, they don't even know their own definitions. They can expand them at any time. So, associated forces. This could be construed as, say you give money to a charity, like March for Kids, let's say. You give money to a charity, March for Kids. It turns out that money goes to Al-Qaeda. The judge also asked that question. Well, would that get a person subject to this law? And the government says, we don't know. So, that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners who commits a belligerent act. Someone define a belligerent act for me. Directly supported such hostilities in aid of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So let me take this language literally, being completely literal. If you applaud a guy who puts on a rodeo, that the whole purpose of the rodeo is to criticize Germany, you could be considered a suspected terrorist. How? Well, you applauding for that person is substantially supporting, and that person putting on the rodeo gave a water bottle to someone who happened to be on the terrorist watch list, and their associated forces. The rodeo criticizing is a belligerent act, and Germany is a coalition partner of the United States. So quite literally, that language could be applied to any situation. So how is it bad? Well, the NDAA changes the current national security policy, and this would be important. An important step in fighting it is that it actually changes policy. This changes national security policy in the targeting profile beyond the AUMF. Countries being protected. You don't even have to commit a belligerent act against the US. Britain, Germany, any person, and coalition partners isn't defined either. So anyone we consider a coalition partner at that time, you do anything that could be considered belligerent toward that country, and NDAA applies to you. Time frame. Involvement in terrorist attacks of 9/11/01, not necessary. See, this is where it goes from retroactive for a crime already committed to pre-crime. Commit a belligerent act. In fact, Lindsey Graham, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, was on the Senate floor saying that if you even think about supporting Al-Qaeda, if you even think about supporting the Taliban, then there are 3 things coming your way: death, detention, and prosecution. Notice he used the words, if you even think. Now, it goes from a policy of retribution to a policy for a war on terror. Kind of like a war on poverty or a war on red chairs. So let's go into terrorism. Terrorism is an idea, and it's really not a very popular one. Number one, you can't legislate an idea out of existence. It'd be like trying to legislate heart attacks out of existence, or it'd be like trying to legislate a method out of existence. And what is it, the common phrase, ideas are bulletproof. You can't really legislate and say, well, no one will now think of the color blue. The idea of blue no longer exists in our society. It is now red. You can't really do that. It doesn't work. And number two, you have a better chance of drowning in bathtubs, getting struck by lightning twice and surviving, getting heart disease by about 10,000 times better chance, and actually getting killed by a police officer as an innocent when the police officer is performing his duty, than being killed in a terrorist attack. So why are we not focusing on legislating heart disease out of existence? So here's a quote from Judge Katherine Forrest in her preliminary injunction against the National Defense Authorization Act. And she said, quote, "The government was unable to define precisely what direct or substantial support means. Thus, an individual could run the risk of substantially supporting or directly supporting an associated force without even being aware that he or she was doing so. This measure has a chilling impact on First Amendment rights," Judge Katherine Forrest. So the 2012 NDAA does not define terms. It is very vague. Now a little pop quiz here. Who said, "Trust not in the conscience of man, but bind them with the chains of the Constitution"? Jefferson. Exactly. Now, if we're trusting in the conscience of man to define belligerent act, associated forces, substantially supported, and coalition partners, if all men were angels, why would we need laws like this? So, belligerent act, associated forces, substantially supported, coalition partners, the government doesn't have any definitions for them. In the court case, they were asked multiple times. They said, oh, we'll have to refer to the laws of war. Hey, we'll have to do this. Hey, we'll have to do that. They didn't have any definitions for these, and they still don't. So they can mean whatever they want them to mean. The NDAA authorizes the military to detain American citizens and any person around the world. This has no geographic limitations until the end of hostilities. With a war on an idea or a war on a method, it means indefinitely. When are we going to win the war on terrorism? When are people going to stop, using the literal definition of terrorism, when are people going to stop jumping out from behind doors and scaring their friends? When are we going to win that war? We're not. So since a belligerent act or terrorist act is not defined in the NDAA, we have to look to the government to define it for us. Just as if, let's say Kodak, the camera company, were to do something completely outside their power and say, all red automobiles must be in our parking lots by this time next year. We look to Kodak's enforcing agencies. Okay, what's red? Mahogany? Is it maroon? Is it light red? What is a car? What is an automobile? Can I bring in an engine block and a bumper? Does that count? So let's look to the enforcing agencies to define what's a terrorism or what's a terrorist. So people or groups who provide identification as inconsistent or suspect or demands identity privacy. Oh, you know, you demand privacy, you're obviously a terrorist. And note that this says related to military surplus stores. Well, on our website, which is pandaunite.org, we have a list. There are over 30 different documents related to martial arts schools, related to grocery stores, related to coffee shops. This is just a nice little sample I pulled. So, insist on paying with cash. Who pays for everything with credit cards? Terrorists. Significantly alters appearance from visit to visit. So, you know, you walk in one day and you purchase maybe an infidel shirt, I don't know. So you walk in one day, you purchase one of those, and you walk in the next day and you've shaved your beard. They go, oh my God, he's a terrorist. Call the FBI. And actually, my friend Don Manning, who hosts Speaking of America out in California, he worked at a car dealership. And they had those flyers distributed to everyone. They were distributed to hotels. In fact, if you ask for a specific room in a hotel, the hotel is recommended to contact the FBI. So if you ask if okay, the FBI is going to be called on me. I have a specific room. So the FBI has distributed these out to pretty much every type of business, as many as they can get at least. Obviously not every business in America has one of these sitting in their back room. But my friend Don Manning works at a car dealership, and they had a guy come in and buy a Corvette. Well, about a week after the guy came in and bought a Corvette, they had the men in black, if you will, show up. Secret Service, Office of Naval Intelligence, shows up, questions Don. So how much did he ask for? What was he buying the car for? Where was he heading? Just on and on and on and on. And what Don found out later was the guy was staying in a hotel where the owner thought he was suspicious. So the owner of the hotel called the FBI and whoever else on this guy. And so now Office of Naval Intelligence and the Secret Service are chasing him across the nation. So this happens. If you have missing hand or fingers, so where does this put our wounded veterans? Right in the limelight. If you make extreme religious statements coupled with comments that are violent or appear to condone violence. So I'm totally going to kick that chair. I mean, that appears to condone violence. It's not condoning it in any way. I'm using it as an example, but it may appear to somebody. And who defines what an extreme religious statement is? What is an extreme statement? Is it anything? Here's my favorite. Make suspicious comments regarding anti-US, radical theology, vague or cryptic warnings that suggest or appear to endorse the use of violence in support of a cause. Well, the definition of a cryptic warning is one that's hard to understand. So if you say something and they think it means something else, you know, I have to go to the restroom. Oh, he means he's going there to grab a bomb. And they call the FBI. Okay, so next, that's a fun one. Okay, here we go. So this is a page out of the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism Response to Terrorism, also known as the START Report. This is produced by Department of Homeland Security, January 31st of this year. And it does a great job of defining who they really think the terrorists are. If you are nationalistic as opposed to universal international orientation, you know that American flag you have, terrorist. If you are anti-global, here. If you are suspicious of centralized federal authority, if you don't believe the federal government should run everything, you are a terrorist. If you are reverent of individual liberty, how dare you have a constitution? You are a terrorist. If you believe in conspiracy theories that involve grave threat to national sovereignty and or personal liberty. Oh, like conspiracy theories like the TSA? I mean, hey, I don't know. So let's see, I fit, oh yeah, oh well. Single issue. Groups or individuals that obsessively focus on a very specific or narrowly defined cause. So you know all those, these anti-abortion groups. All of the PANDA, for example. We focus specifically on NDAA. We are a single issue terrorist group, and I'm just about proud to say it after these definitions. Groups from all sides of the political spectrum. So, you know, you focus on turning these chairs blue instead of red. I'm just using the chairs. I love the chairs, apparently. But turning these chairs blue instead of red, you are obviously a terrorist organization. So, warning signs for police. This is directly from Homeland Security, FBI, National Counterterrorism Center. Which, by the way, this National Counterterrorism Center that was put together to stop terrorist attacks, and they swore to the American people, up and down and left and right, that, number one, we prevent every terrorist attack from ever happening, and number two, we will only hold people's data for 90 days. That's it. We only need 90 days. We'll hold all of your information. We're not going to be like, oh, we're not going to hold your information. No, we're going to hold your information. But we're going to hold it for only 90 days. So they very quickly broke that promise. And so then they had to come back out and say, well, you know, we're going to hold the data of non-suspected terrorists for 90 days. But suspected terrorists is a different story. We're going to hold your data forever. And now, actually in March or April, they came out and said, well, you know, people who may or may not be terrorists constitute a grave threat to this country, so we need to hold everyone's data for 5 years. Rand Paul said that the government has spied on us gazillions of times, and that's not an underestimation. It's a national secret how many times we're spied on, but gazillions pretty much covers everyone in the United States. In fact, I think they're in my phone. I say hi to them every once in a while. Okay, so people likely to commit violence speak against the government. How dare you speak against your loyal master? Your royal master issuing royal decrees. How dare you speak against that, peasant? They blame the government for their perceived problems. There's two issues with this statement. Number one, if you have a problem with the government, it is a perceived problem. The government can do no wrong. All your problems with the government are in your head. And number two, if you blame the government for them, you're a suspected terrorist. And they issue this list to police departments and, unfortunately, sheriff's departments. And our law enforcement is supposed to be protecting and serving. They're issuing these reports to them. Unusual or extreme actions that catch the attention of others. I mean, how vague can that be? And these literally can get you turned in for terrorism. This is not just, oh, they have to meet multiple of these, which we already do as a group. I know that for a fact. But this is, if we see one of these, there was a report list issued to the fire department of New York. Said if you see a map on somebody's seat, report to the FBI, they're a terrorist. Okay? So this isn't just, oh, we see multiple of these things, we can detain you. This is, if you show any of these signs, we can pick you up as a terrorist. If you are active online to show extreme views / connect with others. Not just show extreme views. There's a very important, every comma and every period in legal language is very important. When it shows / it's an or. So does anyone have a Facebook in this room? Raise your hand if you have a Facebook. Raise your hand if you have email. So most of you have connected with others online and therefore are suspected terrorists. So does it apply to American citizens? NDAA section 1022. Number 2, covered persons. The requirement in paragraph 1 shall apply to any person whose detention is authorized under section 1021 who is determined yada yada yada. So it's referring specifically to the requirement. What is this requirement? All right, NDAA section 1022, A1. By the way, all this language that I'm talking about is on the back table. You guys can check this out for yourself, and those of you who already have the language, you can follow along. Number 1, in general, excess is provided in paragraph 4, the armed forces of the United States. Does not say police departments. The armed forces of the United States shall hold a person described in paragraph 2 who is captured in the course of hostilities authorized by the AUMF or authorization for use of military force in military custody, not police custody, military custody, pending disposition under the law of war. Shall hold in this context means must hold. That is a requirement. They absolutely have to hold you. NDAA section 1021B1. This is the original Feinstein Amendment. This was introduced to the NDAA back in 2012 when they were first debating it, and Senator Feinstein introduced this one as well. You may recognize Senator Feinstein as the wonderful lady who wants to ban assault rifles across the nation and said she would take away Mr. and Mrs. America's guns if she had the chance to. United States citizens, the requirement, that specific requirement we talked about, to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. At a first reading, this goes, well, heck, the United States citizens are exempt, obviously. But removing the requirement shall hold, because they're not removing a requirement, they're removing the requirement. Shall hold means the U.S. military may hold U.S. citizens. For example, let's say I own a Walmart. There's a sign on the door of the Walmart that says, you are not required to wear a shirt in this Walmart. That'd be a weird Walmart. But you're not required to wear a shirt in this Walmart. And you walk in, and you're all strapping, and you're wearing a business shirt, and you're like, should I arrest you? Or should I say you're breaking the rules? No. You're not required to wear a shirt. But can you? Of course. If you come in wearing a parka, are you required to wear that parka? No, but can you? Absolutely. So if the military is not required to hold you, can they? Absolutely. So this is you have to, when you're looking at laws, if there's a lot of tricky legal language like this, the law is probably a bad idea. Because those who are open and honest meet in an open forum and make things simple and easy to understand. Convoluted language like this is a pure example of how the NDAA, it should be any bill, any law passed, whether it's here in this county, whether it's in this city, whether it's in this state, or whether it's across the nation. If you see language that looks confusing, watch out, because they might be trying to take your rights with that one. So it does not prohibit U.S. citizens from being detained by the U.S. military under Section 1022, and not just the U.S. military. Senator Lindsey Graham, who was on the floor, besides saying death, detention, prosecution for thinking about terrorism, is on the floor saying, shut up, you don't get a lawyer. Right on the Senate floor. He supports this. Back. So Lindsey Graham supports this, and in his victory video, he did a victory video sitting in front of the camera. He didn't exactly say, I took away all your rights and made America a battlefield, but he might as well have. He said that this gives the FBI, the CIA, and any other agencies, or any other federal agencies, the authority to detain U.S. citizens as well. Now, it has to be in military custody, specifically military custody. But who is enforcing this law? The executive branch, our government, our federal government. If the federal government's interpreting this to mean the FBI, the Secret Service and FBI can come detain you. And Interpol. Who knows what Interpol is, wants to throw an answer out? International Police. Yeah. Interpol was given political immunity by our president. Political immunity is usually granted to ambassadors and people in the United States who, well, you don't know the laws of the country you're visiting. So you should be granted immunity from breaking some of those laws accidentally or things like that. Well, Interpol's an armed force. And Interpol was granted political immunity with an executive order. I don't remember the number right now, but an executive order this January. So Interpol can come and pick you up, and there's no one stopping that. So here's the graph. U.S. citizens it may hold. Non-citizens shall hold. You know anybody who's outside the United States who's not a U.S. citizen, who lives outside the U.S.? They're your friends and family. The military shall hold them. Not a maybe. Shall. They're required to. So, do we really want to give a president that kind of power? I wouldn't even give my own mother that kind of power. If I gave my mother the power to detain me, oh boy. So, do we really want to give anyone that kind of power? Lord Acton, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. This is absolute power. Okay, so does it undermine your constitutional rights? Here's a short list. Article 1, Section 9, Suspension Clause. Says Congress has not suspended habeas corpus. This is in violation because it circumvents habeas corpus. Article 3, Section 2, Grand Jury Indictment. You're not going to get a grand jury if you're held without trial. Article 3, Section 3, Treason. This is interesting because that clause states, treason shall only exist in levying war against them. Them being the states and them being the people. When Congress allowed the laws of war to be applied to the American people, and we'll go into that in a minute, but Congress allowed the laws of war to be applied to the American people, effectively declaring war on America, violating the treason clause. I guarantee you they have more than 2 witnesses. They voted on it together. First Amendment, free speech. Judge Katherine Forrest covered that very well. It's pretty easy to look into as well. Because say you're hanging out with me and say I'm on the terrorist watch list. I probably already am. But let's say I'm on the terrorist watch list and you're hanging out with me for a day. You're a journalist. And they want you to write a story about me the next day. Well, if you can be indefinitely detained for substantially supporting associated forces of terrorism, are you going to write a positive article about me or a negative article about me for your own safety?
I'll write a positive.
Brave ones in the audience. The average person will be pressured by that. That is chilling free speech. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. On many of these different documents, they describe people who own multiple guns as terrorists, veterans as terrorists. And this has a chilling effect on your right to bear arms. Because if you're a law-abiding citizen and owning a lot of guns makes you a terrorist, are you going to want to abide by that law and not own as many guns, or not own different types of guns? Of course. So, Second Amendment. Fourth Amendment, to be secure in persons and papers. The military can burst in your house and detain you. You're not secure in your persons and papers. Fifth Amendment, due process. You're not getting a trial, but why bother with due process? In fact, Attorney General Eric Holder, I'm sure we all love him to the death, and that shall not be construed as any statement condoning violence. He said in front of, I want to say it was Georgetown University, after they killed Anwar al-Awlaki and Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. Now, a lot of people, unfortunately, are okay with killing someone who we accuse of being a terrorist in a foreign country, Yemen, with a drone strike. But how many of you then support 3 weeks later launching a drone strike on his 16-year-old son who's an American citizen from Colorado? Who supports that? See? And both of these attacks were justified by Attorney General Eric Holder as this is a different type of due process. This is judicial process. What he was saying was a couple men in a room can decide whether you live or die. And that violates due process. Sixth Amendment, speedy trial. Military commissions rule over a battlefield. And the CRS Congressional Research Report, April 2010, on the Military Commissions Act, 2009, specifically said that you will not get a speedy trial in a military commission, period. Eighth Amendment, cruel unusual punishment. Well, with the NDAA, you can be hauled off to a foreign country and tortured. That's cruel unusual punishment, black site. And there's several more that don't really fit on the slide. For example, the 10th Amendment of states' rights. If the federalized military can come and detain someone, that's overpowering the states. It's taking away a lot of state authority. It's taking away a lot of local departmental authority as well. Because the military can come in, and in the case of Brandon Robb, for example, in the case of Brandon Robb, who was detained for his Facebook postings, which were rap lyrics, and someone misconstrued them, he was detained in a psych ward for probably about 4 or 5 days, I believe, and he was an ex-Marine. The sheriff's department, or the local police department, was used as the busboy, if you will, the taxi driver. They didn't make the arrest. They didn't have anything to do with the arrest. And all they did was drive the car that Brandon Robb was taken in, overriding local authority by many magnitudes. So even though it directly violates at least 6 amendments of your Bill of Rights and several articles of the Constitution, and is probably the most unconstitutional law ever passed since the Civil War, that is not the most dangerous part of this law. The most dangerous part of the NDAA is hidden in that requirement to detain. Let's look at it again and highlight a different part. The Armed Forces of the United States shall hold a person described in paragraph 2 who is captured in the course of hostilities authorized by the AUMF in military custody pending disposition, which means they're going to decide what they do with you under the law of war. Where's the Constitution in there? Under the law of war. So, the law of war governs what countries can and cannot do during wartime. Geneva Convention set up the international laws of war, and the U.S. has its own law of war desk book they update every year. Well, this law of war is only applied to a battlefield. Only. When you apply the law of war to a territory, it is a battlefield. And the law of war, you're pending disposition under the law of war. So let's recap. Anyone can be picked up, anyone can be detained by the military, and when you're detained by the military, if you get a trial, you probably won't, because it says without trial, But even if you don't get a trial, you will be pending disposition under the law of war. When Judge Katherine Forrest was talking to the government lawyers and said, okay, can these activists be detained? They went, we'll have to check in the law of war. Why not the Constitution? What happened to checking that? Oh, wait. Should they check the law of war? The law of war trumps the Constitution under the NDAA. You are pending disposition under the law of war. Anyone can be picked up, which means the Constitution is superseded by the law of war. Now, I know everybody hates bringing up Nazi Germany. Oh, you're being an extremist. You're comparing everything to Nazi Germany. Well, let's look at Nazi Germany's judicial system. Nazi Germany's judicial system, just before the Second World War, was they would choose to try you in a civilian court, not give you a trial, or try you in a military court. They had that option. Well, guess what? Since they have the option to detain you under NDAA, they have the option to try you under the law of war, which mirrors Germany's judicial system. No Second Amendment, no Fourth Amendment, no constitutional individual rights are in the law of war. Especially because you're not even protected by the law of war. In fact, the government couldn't find you in the law of war. Why? Let's real quick go through the law of war. The law of war started Geneva Convention. Geneva Convention had two classes of people protected: combatants and non-combatants. Combatants, you're a soldier with or without a uniform, you take up arms against another country, you're a combatant. Non-combatants, you're a civilian, you're a citizen, you're not really involved in the conflict. Well, the United States government after 9/11 wanted to torture people. Thought it was a good idea. In order to torture people and not violate Geneva Convention, they had to create a legal new class of person out of thin air. They call this unlawful enemy combatants. And then when they killed Abdurrahman al-Awlaki and Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen in two separate drone strikes, just before that, they had to change the definition, or change the name of this category from unlawful enemy combatants who have no rights under the law of war, to unprivileged enemy belligerents, which first of all implies that your rights are a privilege. Your rights are God-given and inalienable according to the Constitution. They're not a privilege, but unprivileged enemy belligerents. You don't have to take up arms against anything, you can just be belligerent. Kind of like when I was belligerent to my mother and whipped into shape. You can just be belligerent. So anyone around the world has been placed into this category that Geneva Convention doesn't protect. You're not protected by the Constitution, you're not protected by the laws of war, you have no rights under either. So they've taken the U.S. Constitution, which was once the supreme law of the land, and literally replaced it with the law of war. And the reason I say literally replaced it, even though they only provided the option, if I gave every one of you the option to dig into my bank account and grab $50 out of it every single day, you might tell me, oh no, I'd never do that. I respect you too much, that never something I'd do. But 2 months later, your car breaks down. You really need that $50. I'll pay him back. I'll pay him back. I'm gonna grab the $50 from the bank. I'll pay him back. I swear. And the electric bill's late, and you need to grab another $50. I'll pay that one back to him too. I'll pay him back. And eventually, since there's no retribution, I said you could take $50 out of my bank account. There's no retribution. Eventually, you're taking $50 out of it every day. You count it as your regular income. The government does this all the time. Well, if they give them the option to use the law of war, which gives them all the power and you none, are they going to start using that more? Or are they going to start using the Constitution more? Start using the law of war. So, recapping. America is a battlefield now. The laws of war apply here. You can be tried under the law of war. The military can come into your house and detain you without trial till the end of hostilities. And you don't get any rights. You'll be tried in a military commission if you're tried at all. And all they have to do is say, you're a terrorist. You're someone we suspect. There's no proof. There's no proof that has to be presented because you never get a trial. None of your rights are present. And now when different news organizations say, oh my God, the president might be issuing a presidential policy directive to have our military on the ground to protect us from cyber attacks. You shouldn't be surprised. We're a battlefield now, legally. I don't believe we're a battlefield. I think we're still God-given rights or inalienable constitution, but legally we're a battlefield. In fact, BEMA. Who has heard of BEMA? Really? What does it stand for?
Federal Emergency Management.
BEMA. That is B with a boy. B-boy. Who has heard of BEMA? B-I-M-A. It's something you guys all need to write down and look up. BEMA is going to be playing a very active role in your future. BEMA is the Biometrics Identity Management Agency. The head of BEMA, current head, his major is in psychological operations, PSYOPs. His major is in changing public opinion. And there's a video on BEMA's website, and it goes kind of like this. It's an introductory video for the agency, but the first 27 seconds are all that's worth watching. Here's why. It says, theater, as in theater of war. Just like in World War II, we had the Pacific Theater and European Theater. Theater, Afghanistan. Pans over. Theater, Gulf of Aden, right outside Somalia. Pans over. Theater, Homeland USA. Theater of war. BEMA, Biometric Identity Management Agency, confirms America is a battlefield. They released that video on their website after the NDAA passed. Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Carl Levin, all. America is a battlefield. They agree. These are your top people in public political office at the federal level. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation. So, obviously this is horrible. This is something that you never want to have in America. It's the same type of laws passed in Germany, Russia, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Mao Zedong's China. And this is a law you never want to have in your community. Now, what can you do about it, though? I mean, hey, it's a federal law. Do your national representatives listen to your thousands of phone calls? No. They don't. They're not swayed by that. They're swayed by special interests, usually. In fact, my own senator, Rob Portman, got paid $135,000 to vote yes on NDAA. $135,000. And guess by who? A night vision company, which would be producing the night vision for these troops to burst in the middle of the night into your home and detain you. So your national representatives aren't listening. Our judicial system, let's see, what's our judicial system's record on civil liberties? Oh. Yeah, they don't have a good one at all. Your rights don't, according to the Supreme Court, you don't have any rights when the TSA walks up to you. And the TSA just applied to be searching you on your highway. They just put it in the Federal Register a couple days ago. So our judicial system is not going to protect us. And we have a time limit even, because Hedges v. Obama is in the judicial system. When the Supreme Court declares the NDAA constitutional, it's going to be much harder to convince other people it's not. And to show them in the Constitution we have our 4th Amendment, 5th Amendment, 8th Amendment. So obviously, the judicial, legislative, and the executive branch asked for this power. President Obama, according to Carl Levin on the Senate floor, asked for this power. You know the veto threat? Who knew that President Obama issued a veto threat before NDAA 2012 passed? Well, you know why he issued a veto threat? Because the language wasn't vague enough. It didn't include American citizens, was the reason he issued a veto threat. As soon as the language included American citizens, he dropped like a hot potato. Because it gave him the flexibility to fight terrorism. What's that? Bind them with the chains of the Constitution. That doesn't sound flexible. Thomas Jefferson. So, how can we actually fight this? It's a concept sometimes known as nullification, which is really an incorrect term for it. The correct term would be assertion. According to Marbury versus Madison, any law that is unconstitutional from the get-go is null and void, exactly. All any community has to do is recognize that that law is null and void and refuse to enforce it. The sheriff takes their power back from the military. The county commission protects their citizens and fulfills their oath to protect the rights of the citizens of that county. And all it takes is the passing of legislation and the adherence to the rule of law. And all the resolution really says is, we believe this is unconstitutional, and this should never be enforced here. I'm sure if I took a poll right now of who in fact, Senator Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and Kelly Ayotte. In fact, Kelly Ayotte, even better, Kelly Ayotte, senator, almost cried on the Senate floor, saying this should be even worse. They shouldn't just detain, they should kill him on the spot. That was her argument. Ayotte, McCain, and Graham were out in front of a college and said, well, how many of you think we should never give terrorists a trial? And this is a room of military contractors. Only half of them raised their hand. Only half. In front of the three most powerful senators pushing the NDAA. The American people still believes in the rule of law. And all it takes is an assertion, and we have passed resolutions out to the county commissioners and to the sheriff. All it takes is assertion that this will not happen in my community. This will never happen in my community. And you join the growing ranks. Oakland County, Michigan. We recently had an awesome victory there. I'm super excited about that. Oakland County, Michigan, October 18th. Unanimous vote of 20-0. The county commissioners passed a resolution stopping the NDAA in Oakland County. 1.2 million people protected. That's awesome. It can happen here. You guys can be protected too. It takes the will of the people. Thank you, commissioners, for coming out. Thank you, sheriff, for coming out and listening.
One day, somebody's going to have to say enough.